Roger Powell has just arrived. If you just bear with me while I just check the stream. Okay, Chairman, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to you all to the Joint Standard Complaints Committee. As you've heard, the meeting is being recorded and is being viewed, or if anybody's watching, is being viewed on YouTube. So if we start off with the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence.
Chairman, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Roy Sparks, Councillor Lance Jones and Councillor Annabel de Capel-Brooke. Are there any other apologies that I should be made aware of? No, that's all then, Chairman. Okay,
thank you very much. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting on the 15th of July. For those who've managed to read it, are there any amendments that need to be made, or may I have a proposal to accept?
Chairman?
Yes?
Yeah. I've got my blue hand up, but I'm not sure if you saw that.
I can't see them all at the minute. My screen keeps changing.
Okay. On the minutes of the last meeting, we had a discussion about the Local Government Association Model Member Code of Conduct consultation, and the monitoring officers listed questions. There were 17 questions. On the minutes, we only have down to question 16. Question 17, the answer on the one that was given to us at the council meeting was, it may be useful for the LGA to consider both the planning and the licensing codes at the same time. So we said that, but I think we also said that they perhaps ought to also consider an officer code at the same time, and I wrote in so that could go to be sent off with the submission. I believe Mrs. Morris did do that.
Yes, I remember that.
I can confirm I did that.
Okay, thanks, Bab. So, subject to that amendment to the minutes, are there any other required amendments to the minutes? May I have a proposal to accept the minutes with the amendment?
With that amendment, Chair, I will propose that.
Without amendment?
With that amendment.
With amendment. Okay, seconded. Andy? Easier to say, seeing I'm looking at faces. Anyone against? In which case, those minutes are accepted and virtually signed. Okay. Hold on, my papers are moving. Item 3. To receive any declarations of interest. Anyone taking part in the meeting have a declaration of interest? Nice and quiet. Thank you very much. On to item 4. Any questions by members under the Council Procedure Rule 10.3? Any, Ben?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. Which brings us to item 5. Are there any requests for dispensations?
I have not been made aware of any, Chair.
Okay. Which brings us to item 6, the report from the monitoring officer, the activity report of the monitoring officer. Have you all seen it? Does anyone wish to make any comments on it?
Might it be helpful, Chairman, if I just run through a few of the key issues?
Carry on, please.
Thank you. Members, of course, will have read the report, so I won't dwell too long on it. I would just like to highlight that since your last meeting, at paragraph 1.2, there has been 2 new code of conduct complaints. Both of these have been dealt with and closed, so that there was no progression to any form of other action. I did promise you at the last meeting that I would give an update on outstanding complaints, and in paragraph 1.3 you will note that we have 5 current complaints that are going on at the moment, one of which very recently has been at a hearing and continues over to a further hearing to be set in November. The other 4 matters, I am waiting for the final investigation reports from external providers. But I do have dates as to when those are expected, and as requested by the committee, I continue to push for an early receipt of those investigation reports to the council in order that we may progress them as quickly as possible to try to ensure that we deal with all our work prior to the end of March next year. However, members are aware that any outstanding complaints would be passed to the new Northamptonshire Unitary Council. I also then go on to general issues, and I'd like to just briefly mention at paragraph 2.2 the new model code of conduct. You'll recall at our last meeting we made many comments which were sent back to the Local Government Association. A quick update for you today is that I understand they received over 1,600 responses to that consultation, and they are considering these. And in particular, it would appear there has been a lot of discussion around the issue of the use of the words civility and respect, as we very much anticipated there would be. My understanding is it's likely that a further consultation will come back out after the 22nd of October. And the LGA have said at a recent local government lawyers conference last Friday that they are hoping to get the new model code finalised by the end of this year. I would then just draw attention to the issue at 3.1 in respect of vacancies on the committee, and the fact that no nominations have been received from town or parish representatives. Bearing in mind there's only 1 meeting for East Northants left, it is proposed that we don't undertake any further recruitment. I think that's all I need to say about this report. The recommendation is set out for you to note the content. Thank you.
Thank you, Babs. Right. I agree with the proposal not to further advertise the vacancy, which would be a waste of time with only 1 meeting left. Leave it to the new unitary to sort out whether they've got the correct number of bodies on seats. So can I have a proposal to accept the monitoring officer's report? Jill, seconded.
No, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Carry on. Hold on, Andy.
Yeah. You didn't mention it, Babs, but it says in 1.3 that 1 was actually passed to the police, but no further action. That's quite unusual, isn't it?
For a matter to be passed to the police, or for there to be no further action?
No, to be passed.
The matter was passed by, yes, it is unusual, though if there is any hint of criminality, then a monitoring officer would consult with the police, or in fact a complainant may well approach the police as well.
Okay. Sorry, thank you very much. That solves that one. I agree with the proposal not to advertise, and thank you for updating us with the investigations. I just wonder whether these take such a long while to go through. We don't really ever know what the procedure is, what the investigating officer does in terms of who they speak to or who they don't speak to, etc. Is there any hard and fast rule on that? For instance, I would have thought they would speak to both the complainant and the complainee.
There are no, if I might help, there are no hard and fast rules how an investigator carries out his investigation. There is good practice whereby the investigator will receive all of the necessary documentation in order to understand the complaint. So the original complaint form, any supporting information, the initial assessment that was carried out by the monitoring officer. They will then plan out their investigation, because they will be able to see who the key witnesses are, and they may choose to interview them, and they may not choose to interview them based on whatever information that they have. I personally have carried out investigations, and I have always found it useful to carry out interviews where there are any issues that need further clarity from the documentary evidence that I have received. But I also find it useful often to have a one-to-one interview with both the complainant and the individual counsellor complained about. So that is my preference when I'm investigating, but it would not be all investigators' preferences. There is a huge discretion as to how you carry out those investigations, which, to be honest, is something that perhaps it would be helpful became more standardised.
Thank you. Would it be in order when we have things like these consultations for the local government association to suggest that there perhaps should be some more standardisation of such investigations?
The way that investigations are carried out are actually in the control to a degree of the local authority, because it's the local authority who agree the procedures that deliver the standards regime. The Localism Act 2011 requires each local authority to put the procedures into place as how they will deal with standards matters. And you know that ENC has developed a document which was signed off, which shows how we go through our process with the initial assessment and the investigation. I think perhaps one thing that we could look to do is to be more prescriptive in that process as to how we would wish to see investigations carried out.
Thank you.
Andy,
Chairman, thank you very much for that. Just got one other point. It was on the consultation we had last time, and there was one where we were discussing the gifts and hospitality, whether it should remain at £25, and that was our conclusion at the end of that item. However, I didn't realise at the time that ENC's was actually £50. I wonder if we might have come to a different conclusion had we realised that.
I know that you actually pointed that out very swiftly to me after the meeting. So I did actually make a note on the submission what our current level was. So I hope that helps.
Yes.
However, sorry, Andy. However, Jill, I would point out that when we were talking about that, we had views higher and lower. So I don't think there's any problem in it reflecting 25 for the remote, but 50 for E&C.
Yes, I just wanted to point that out. That's all.
Okay, Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The mechanism or the process by which investigations are carried out is clearly very important. First of all, because justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done, and it must be done in a timely manner. They're all accepted principles. And some of these cases have been going on now for getting on for 2 years or more. Now, there's not a lot of point in reviewing the process for East Northamptonshire, because East Northamptonshire won't be around much longer, and by about the time you produced an updated process, the council and the district would cease to exist. However, there will need to be a similar document or set of documents for the new unitary. I don't know how the new unitary is going to approach this. Is there any way we can make a submission to the shadow authority on this topic, suggesting that perhaps a group of councillors from the 4 existing authorities might, or possibly the shadow authority might, delegate someone to provide or to produce a suitable document for the start of the new unitary, because my gut feel is that this will be one of those many things that will slip through the hole, and which 3 months after the unitary has taken office, people will realise, oh, we haven't got one of them, and it will finally be addressed. I know Ben's waving his hand, and I know the unitary shadow authority is dealing with lots of issues, but there is no consultation on these matters coming down to the level of councillors. It may be being dealt with by an officer group. It may be being something that's dealt with in background by the central implementation team. However, that is not a democratic process, the central implementation team, and matters like this should be dealt with democratically.
Okay.
I can perhaps start off, Chairman.
I can confirm, Councillor Mercer, that the new constitution for the new authority is being led by and developed through the governance task and finish group, which is councillor led. And that's politically balanced as well. And that group is working its way through the constitution, and that group will produce the code of conduct and the procedure as part of the new constitution.
Andy, if I hold you a minute, let Babs come in first, and then you can reply to both.
If I could just emphasise, of course, the new monitoring officer has been appointed for the new North Northamptonshire Council. That lady will become engaged with the group that is currently working on the constitution. And as the monitoring officer, one of her key duties will be ensuring that a standards regime is in place for the new authority. In order for her to do that, she needs to develop all of the documentation that an authority currently needs to process standards complaints. She will have before her all of the councils that are going into the North Northampton's unitary documentation relating to standards in each of those authority, and the group that is developing the constitution will also have that. Any of the standards documentation will need to be approved by the new authority's standards committee and full council in respect of the code of conduct. I take on board your point that clearly there are a lot of things within the current documentation that need to be looked at in order to try to have a process which is efficient and effective, both in quality, quantity and time for the new authority in the processing of standard complaints. I hope that's hopeful. There is no reason why this committee cannot record in their minutes their concerns that the new standards regime fulfills this efficient process if they so wish, and that can be passed on to the group looking at this via Ben and his colleagues.
Andy, do you wish to respond?
Oh, where to start? Right, first of all, I've spoken to the people on the Task and Finish group looking at the Constitution, and they will not have sufficient time to deal with these matters in depth. It's a simple fact. Right, secondly, the Constitution that was presented to the Shadow Authority, I was a leading member of the working group under the Joint Committee that worked on the draft Constitution for the Shadow Authority. I actually helped draft a lot of it. We had a series of meetings. The Constitution that was then presented to the Shadow Authority was a different one. It wasn't the one we'd agreed. That's a fairly serious matter, and the documentation said it was largely based on ours. It wasn't.
I would have to correct you on that, Councillor Mercer. The document was exactly as was presented to the Joint Committee, save for some minor changes as a result of the revised structural changes order. They were the only changes, and those changes were reported to the Joint Committee. It wasn't a different document at all.
I find that a very strange comment, because the final document never went to the Joint Committee, never went to our working group, because the lockdown happened before we got a final document.
The sections of the documents have been to the Joint Committee. The final document went to the Joint Committee. It didn't go to a Joint Committee meeting because we couldn't hold a meeting due to lockdown. It did go to Joint Committee members.
It certainly didn't go to the working group. I'll leave it at that.
May I ask Ben and Babs, do our minutes become part of the documentation that will be looked at by the new monitoring officer?
We can certainly ask the new monitoring officer, because she does join in November, I believe, to review the minutes of the meetings at East Northants. I hope to be able to meet with her at some point after her arrival and ask Ben to join us, so that we can in fact explain what East Northants Standards Committee has been doing over the last year. And that would be a good opportunity for us to hand over the minutes if she hasn't already looked at them on our website. But I'm sure as an extra keen new monitoring officer, she will be reviewing all of the council's websites, looking at what the standards committees have been up to.
I'm happy with that response. And it's someone else, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. Can I bring us back to 1.3 of the report, which the monitoring officer talked about? Babs, you say that you've got now some end dates for the 4 cases that have been put out for conclusion by external reviewers. Can you expand on that, and also the timing of the final meeting of the JSCC, to see whether there is an opportunity to wrap these cases up before the expiration of this body and the relevant councils, or not? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
I think the last committee of the JSCC, Ben, you will have to help me with the date here. It would be in March, I would imagine.
The last meeting is the 24th of February.
No. Right.
Agreed.
Thank
It's
you.
in my diary.
The last meeting will be the 24th of February. Therefore, I will report on where we are at that stage. But in respect of these matters, if the investigation report finds, for want of a better word, there's a case to answer, it would be referred to a hearings panel, and those hearings panels can run up until the end of March. So although your meeting is in February, the hearings panels can run up to the end of March. The indication that I'm getting from the external provider is that we will be getting the investigation reports on the 4 outstanding matters by the end of this month, subject to the parties engaging in response as they're required to do under our procedure to those reports. So investigations are very reliant on others responding within reasonable timescales to conclude to the final report.
Okay, Jill?
Thank you, Chair.
You just raised a question in my mind there, Babs. You say if they reply within a reasonable time. Are they given a deadline with which to reply to? Okay.
Yes, they are given a deadline, but often for whatever reason, they do not respond, or they have a reason for not responding within that deadline. And some the investigators try to give some leeway if it then achieves a final report. But the investigator is speaking to myself, is speaking to Ben. So they do know the importance of us trying to finalise these matters before the end of March.
My concern is that we've only actually had one hearing previously, and on that one it did come back to the committee to discuss certain matters of detail or of response when there was an outcome that was disputed, if you like. And so that's what I'm concerned, is that you might get the hearing, get that over, but there is some follow-up needed, and that we really try to get that in before the meeting in February.
We will endeavour to push it on. Of course, individuals always have the right of appeal from the first hearing as well. So that builds in another period of time when a new panel would have to hear it. But I am really doing my very best, as is Ben, to do all we can to get these matters concluded by the end of this council.
Okay, Vivian?
Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things. I think, I mean, we've all discussed at great length at previous meetings how concerned we are about the delays that do seem to occur in this process, and not least me having complained about it. I think the difficulty is, despite our best efforts and putting in timelines and response deadlines, matters seem to take on a character of their own, and people's diaries are busy. The investigating officers aren't just dealing with us, they're dealing with other work. People have, you know, illness, holidays, and now we've had COVID. So although, you know, looking at things that are outstanding, they have been dragging on for an outrageously long time, you know, well over 12 months, which all of us would deplore. When it actually comes down to it, it's very, very difficult to keep a handle on them and control them. And I think that, you know, the fact that Babs and Ben have been able to get some dates from the investigator about when they're now due to have their reports come back to us is laudable, because it is really not an easy thing to do. Notwithstanding, I think we do need to continue to push to try and conclude all of our own matters. It would be a real shame to see some of these handed over to the next authority. And if I may, I'd just like to go back to that previous point, because I'm not sure that just on a matter of clarification, I wasn't quite sure that I understood this. Are we saying that a standards regime for the new authority is way down the bottom of the list of things to get organised and might actually not be properly in place by the time the new authority comes into being? Or have I misunderstood?
No, that's not the case.
Right, thank you. Perhaps you'd like to explain to me then. I'm afraid I didn't get it.
The new standards regime will be part of the new constitution, which will be ready for the new council in the same way as any other part of the constitution.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. Does anyone else with Jill?
Sorry, just going back there, I've recently had to look at the procedures. I'm trying to find the heading: procedure for assessment, investigation, determination, etc. of complaints. And in that, there are some deadlines or some timelines that we are told this must happen 10 days or 20 days after that. And I'm just worried that sometimes I know with COVID and everything, it's obviously makes a difference and there may be extenuating circumstances, but I wouldn't like us to be open to, open a dispute because that timeline is not kept to.
I completely understand where you're coming from. And yes, technically, we should be complying with those timescales, but there are always issues which can be on both sides, which means those timelines slip, because it is very important those involved in the process engage all the way through and respond in the appropriate time scales.
All I would add to that is that we should, as Jill was implied, we should be working to those timescales unless there are circumstances which put it beyond their control, such as a person's illness. So yes, with the best will in the world, with no problems, all our cases should be dealt with exactly within those timescales. But we must think of it just like any grievance, just like any court case. There can be delays due to unforeseen circumstances. Sorry, was that? Oh, it's just put your hand up, Andy. I thought. Right. If there's no more comments on those issues, can I have a proposal to accept the monitoring officer's report? Nigel, seconded. Jill, easier because we were looking at you. Anyone object? So the monitoring officer's report is accepted. Thank you very much, Babs. That leads us on, if I can find where the agenda has slipped to now, to item 7, the response to the CSPL recommendations. I am going to ask cheekily that Babs take the lead on this, but I would add one thing at the beginning. She's already aware of this. Way at the end of the document, if I can remember which number it is now, best practice 16, 17, there is a reference to 2023, which is a mistake.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, members will, I've no doubt, read the report and will recall that these recommendations came out from the January review by the Committee for Standards in Public Life. And we were asked in July of this year to start pulling together what our response would be to these recommendations when that we were reminded in this autumn our responses would be required. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the Chief Executive received that autumn reminder, and we were asked by the Committee for Standards in Public Life to provide a response by the 30th of November. So it was very timely that this report was on the agenda. What I've tried to do is set out for you some responses, and quite rightly, it has been pointed out to me a number of typos and issues, which I'm very happy to take forward. I will let the members who raised them with me perhaps speak to them, but I can confirm in best practice 3 that should be 2013. We were clearly getting ahead of ourselves, and I will also confirm that all references to the Joint Standards Complaints Committee I will use JSCC throughout, because that was also pointed out to me. The other issue that I spotted was there is no Annex A to this report, which is referred to in Best Practice 14. That was because it was going to be a link to the annual governance statement. So I would be inserting a link to that, because that actually sits on our website. I really don't have anything more to add to this report. I'm very open to any other suggestions that members might to include in our response. And I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to raise any comments? I can't see any hands coming up. Has no one got any comments to raise with regard to this report? As I meant, sorry, who's Jill? Jill.
Just in a couple of places where it says that the local authority should put things on their website, including allegations, view of the independent person, etc. That's quite full. The examples that were given looking at our website were fairly sparse, very, very outlined. I'm not quite sure what they are intending with that. If they're intending for it to name names, I think they are named if in a case it is deemed that it is necessary to, and otherwise we anonymise. But I don't think we go into a lot of these details about what the allegations are or what the outcomes were. I'm not sure we put that level of detail in.
Every local authority does it slightly differently, and there's a discretion as to what you put on, how much, whether you do name or not. We currently put up, I would say, the minimum that could be put up. I think what they're looking for, committee, is to see what people are doing. I'm sure that following that, never surprise me if we get a best practice coming forward of the appropriate decision notices.
Okay, Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a quasi-judicial process, and the principles of natural justice therefore have to be paramount. In a recent case in a neighbouring authority, the accuser made some completely outrageous claims against a councillor. The monitoring officer during the initial assessment phase concluded that they were malicious and had no basis in fact. However, they were published in the media quite prominently with the name of the councillor who was accused, no such retraction by the media matched when the accusations were struck down. The people who were ruled by the monitoring officer to have been acting maliciously were never named. But the ones who made the who were accused and were innocent were. So that completely violates the principles of natural justice. I don't know how we address this matter, but it is something that is clearly a flaw in the way our neighbour operates their procedure, that it ended up punishing the innocent and protecting the malicious. That's something that we ought to submit as a flaw in some standards regimes that definitely needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Andy. Do you wish to respond, Babs?
I take that on board. I pick up the new one.
Okay.
Babs, most of what you said there faded out. I didn't hear it. Could you repeat it, please?
Babs, can you say again?
I'm sorry, elections gone downhill considerably. I will happily discuss years monitoring.
We're losing you, Babs.
So what I did pick up what Babs had said when she said that she would take it on board and she would happily pick it up with the new monitoring officer for the new North Northamptonshire Council.
Thank you very much.
Nigel?
Yes, Chair. An observation about best practice 11, which is one that's primarily viewing a parish council situation where a councillor and clerk are the subject of complaints or vice versa. The suggestion there is that the matter should be investigated by the chair or by the council as a whole, except given exceptional circumstances. I just wonder whether the recourse to an independent party might be better practice, or recourse to a peer might be better practice, or an option to pursue. In other words, that a member of another parish council reviews a case in that circumstance rather than require the parish council to police itself in circumstances, particularly where there may be a dispute between the chair and the clerk, or vice versa. Now, just sort of float that as something that members might have a view on in terms of its practicalities or its benefits that might want to be included in Bab's ENC response.
I understand what you're saying there, Nigel, but I thought best practice 11 was more concerned with who put in the complaint, not the investigation of it, but who put in the complaint. In other words, that it should be, the standard is saying, or the best practice is saying, should be conducted by a parish councillor or the chair, but it would still come, we hope, to a JSCC complaint. So what they're really saying in best practice 11, the complaint that reaches us as the JSCC should come from the parish council as a whole or the chairman, rather than, as currently happens, from the clerk. Do you agree with that interpretation, Babs? No, we've lost you, Babs. We've lost you, Babs.
You just need to unmute, Babs. That's better.
That's better. It's working. Okay.
Yes.
It's working.
Oh my, yes, I don't know. We're going in and out. It's country living again. Your interpretation is right. However, this document that we're sending back is what we currently are experiencing. So although it's good ideas, I wouldn't want to add anything into this submission.
Okay. Who else? Got Nigel? Unmute, please.
Chair, I floated it as an option for review. I'm not desperately keen to include it unless it was felt to be helpful. And taking Bab's point, it might be at a later stage or a different process that approach might be floated. But I think it's worth noting in order so that we do not forget it as a suggestion from below to the upper echelons of local and national government, if I could put it nicely, Chair.
Or perhaps it's another one of those items that Babs needs to put in her handbag for when she talks to the monitoring officer.
Indeed.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on these proposals? Someone down the bottom. Unmute yourself. Unmute. You're still muted.
Can you
That's
hear
it.
me now? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have to say I do have a great deal of sympathy with Nigel's point of view. I do feel that the present setup on this question can open up potentially councillors to bias in making a decision, and I would strongly support a suggestion that it went to an independent person or committee.
Okay. As an initial thought, I must admit, not in the same line as Nigel, but I am concerned that town and parish internal complaints could become a little bit more than they deserve. I'm not entirely convinced it needs to go independent, because I would have hoped that in reaching a body such as ourselves, we are independent, or at least the first line of independence. Response?
I don't think I agree with that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So how would you prefer, albeit this report is on the table before us, but how would you prefer that particular best practice to be addressed?
By an independent judge.
So are you saying...
If you allow me to, I think it goes back to the point that I think there may be a little confusion between about who is making the complaint and then the second stage of investigating that complaint. Now, once a complaint has been made, it is the responsibility of the principal authority to make that initial investigation, consider the complaint initially and decide whether it goes to investigation. And in the case of post-March next year, that would be for North Northamptonshire Council to investigate. It wouldn't be for the parish to investigate its own complaints. I don't know if that helps the clarification.
Response? No. Okay. For a hand wave. Jill?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is, I'm not going to get involved with that issue because I'm not a town councillor, but I think this has thrown up in my mind that whereas Babs had said that the new monitoring officer for the unitary will be looking at the 4 different councils' procedures, I think there's a lot of there's quite a bit of discrepancy between the authorities of how many parish or town councils there are, and I think we need to make sure that ongoing those are taken into account, because obviously we have both on our committee, and I haven't heard anything mentioned about that as a possibility under the unitary, and I think all of that topic will need to be considered going forward, so that parish and towns are given coverage the same way as we do now.
Agreed. Any other comments on that?
We shall certainly feed in the process that we have, and I know that there is similar committees in the north, and then there's a couple of the district and boroughs who don't have town and parish council representation at all, but we shall certainly feed that in, because I think we've all experienced the fact that we think for East Northamptonshire that it's a system that has worked really well.
Okay. Anything else? Vivian?
I think I just feel as if before we do best practice 11 to death, it might be worth checking whether in that morass of complaints surrounding Easton-on-the-Hill, I seem to think that there might have been a complaint there by a parish councillor towards a clerk. There was certainly a complaint between a parish councillor and one of the clerks who was in post during that period. And I can't remember at this particular moment which way round it was. But I think
ways, Vivian.
Both ways.
Both ways.
So then I'm not quite certain that our response there is accurate. No examples, because I think if we're recalling it correctly, we do have an example, and the individuals were made the complaint rather than the chair or the parish itself. And others can perhaps advise on this. The clerk is in two positions, I believe. One, in that they're an employee of the parish council, but also that they're an individual who can make a complaint about another individual if they wish, as the parish councillor can in reverse.
That's my interpretation. No one disagrees with it.
So do we think that it's worth checking whether we want to amend our response at that point, or is it not sufficiently? Do members not feel sufficiently strongly about it for it to make any difference materially?
Although I was involved in it, in looking at it, I don't think it merits changing the report, but that is my own view. Anyone else, Babs?
I mean, we can double check that particular example that you've referred to, and if it is the case, we can include that in the response against best practice 11, the fact that there has been an instance in that case.
Well, I would be perfectly satisfied with that, but obviously it's for everybody to make the decision on that.
Okay. What I suggest is that we minute that we've asked the monitoring officer to check one of our past cases as to whether or not it has a reflection or an amendment on best practice 11. It was number 11, wasn't it? Yes. Does everyone agree with that?
Great.
Gil?
Can I suggest that then the if the monitoring officer does think that merits change, that she discuss that with the chair of the committee to finalise any wording that needs to be added.
Okay.
Is that right?
Okay. Someone else put their hand up. No, all hands are down. Okay then. All hands are down. Okay then. Right, so best practice 11 will be looked at deeper by the monitoring officer and may, deliberately putting that word in, may be amended accordingly. If it is to be amended, the monitoring officer will talk to the chair, vice chair, and the committee. If not, and on that assumption, can I have a proposal to accept this report? All parts other than what we have just spoken about with practice 11.
Chair,
yes, Nigel?
can I just clarify? I sense it might be helpful for a COTUC to be left for the monitoring officer to pursue the couple of matters that have come up in the debate, the one that I raised and the one that Jill raised, as part of the minute for this discussion. I don't want to cut across agreement on the recommendation, but I sense the minute, or we need to ensure the minute has a couple of COTUCs in there for the monitoring officer to use as appropriate.
Okay. Ben or Babs, will you take that on board?
Certainly the tenor of the debate and the comments made will be reflected in the minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to the overall report. Subject to further examination of best practice 11, may I have a proposal to accept that the committee accepts the report for submission? Proposal? Jill, seconder? Andy? Anyone opposed? No one opposed, so the report is accepted. Thank you, Babs, and everyone else who helped with you.
Yeah.
We have reached the end of the agenda. I am about to close the meeting at this point. I would ask you all just to stay on for a second, because there is something that the monitoring officer may wish to tell us about. So if we can cease the streaming, and the meeting is closed.